Hello everybody and welcome back to our Let's Build series where we are building a communal light grid that everyone can share using the Google App Engine and programming in the Go programming language. Last episode we completed our display system, which as you can see here, where every pixel is being represented by the letter O, which is cleverly hidden as the foreground and background color are made to be the same. In this episode, we're going to put together the actual user interface so that a user is going to be able to click on a color up here to choose their color, and then they're going to be able to click on a pixel that they want to change, and it will change to the color that they've requested. And then I think if we have time in the episode after that, what we're going to do is we're going to actually put in the memory system using Memcache so that their changes are actually saved, and so it will at that point actually function totally like a light grid, and that everyone's going to be able to choose pixels, change colors, and all these changes are going to be reflected in the state of the website. So let's get started. First things first, I want to make a correction that Dmitry Shuryov suggested. I apologize for probably mangling your name, Dimitri, but I really do appreciate this. He pointed out that, in fact, when you're creating these slices and we're defining the current number of rows and the theoretical cap on the number of rows, we don't actually need this latter part. So we don't need to put in a theoretical cap if we don't feel like adding it. I'm sure that there are plenty of times when it's very helpful to have a theoretical cap when you're dealing with memory issues or speed or efficiency or I don't know what, but I'm sure it's helpful for many people to have that there, but if you don't need it, like we don't need it, then you can just ignore it altogether. And so that's what I'm going to do. So I want to thank you again, Dimitri, for that. Let's see, the next thing I want to do, a little bit of cleanup, is I want to take the row counts and col counts where currently they're being defined inside the function. I'm going to put them up here as a free-floating variable. You might call it a global. I'm not really sure what the proper title for it, but really just a variable that exists outside of any particular function, so each function can call into it. So I'm going to say var int row count equal, or maybe just var row count equals 25 and var cal count equals 80. So this way it's going to act the same as before, but has the advantage that a function isn't dependent on going through root to find out the number of rows and columns. So that's just good. It's good to have that information in one place. So now that that's done, I think we can start working on the user interface. Now there are two aspects of the user interface that we need to approach, both of which are equally important. The first one is that we need to have the ability to select a color, where currently there's only a grid. In my imagination, I see it as between the title and the grid itself, there'll be a selection of colors to choose from. You select the color you want, and then done. And the second thing we need to work on is the actual clicking on the grid itself so that it changes the pixel color of the place you click. These are both equally important. One without the other is kind of useless, so I think we'll start with the colors first, and then once that's working, we'll make it so that clicking on the grid will change it to the color you've selected. To do that, we're going to need to work on some more structures. And the reason I say that is because we're going to want to create our color palette here, as in the type of colors we're going to be selecting from. We basically, well, what we want to do, and might as well do it now, is say like color array equals string. So we're making an array of strings, and here we're just going to say what colors we're going to have. So off, red, green, blue, white, yellow, right? So okay. So we've defined right there all the colors that we're currently going to allow users to select, and which correspond to the various style sheets we've created for pixel colors. So if we add a pixel color later, all we really need to do that is to add it to the style sheet. So if we needed like an orange, we'd just make an orange here, and we need to add it to this color array. So it's very easy to maintain. That's sort of why I'm doing it here, as opposed to some sort of hard-coded thing where I go through the template and for each color I give it a, its own little section. Because really what I want to do is just loop over the color array, and for each element in the array we're going to create the selection in the template. So it'll look much easier on the templating side. But to do that, we now need to create a color palette, and we're going to need to pass that into the template itself. But to pass anything into the template, we're relying on this particular command, the execute template, but it can only pass a single variable, right? Now the variable can be as complex as you want, but it can only be one. So to increase our flexibility, where currently we're passing in grid, we're going to want to pass in a much more complex variable whose one subcomponent is grid, another subcomponent is the color palette, and then if we add other things like, I don't know, high scores, or I don't even know what, user logins, we'd pass that information in as well as a subcomponent of the overall all-encompassing structure that we're about to create. To do that, we'll start with making these structures, as I mentioned before. And if we think about how a color palette is, what we're going to want to do is create a brush type for each color, right? So we'll say type brush, structure, and really there are only two things that are interesting about the brush. It's color, which is a string, and is it selected? And then a nice way of making questions is to just make it sound like a question. And we're making it a string, but functionally it's a Boolean. Functionally it's an on-off. So if there's anything in there, the answer is yes, it is selected. And then when it passes to the template we're going to say something like if.isSelected. And then we'll do whatever we want to do for selected brushes. Because in that if.isSelected, it only accepts, it's true if there's anything in there and it's false if there's not. And for integers, it's true if the number isn't 0 and it's false if the number is 0. So this is a string, but really it's going to be a Boolean, and when it's selected, we're just going to pass in the word yes or something like that. Okay, so we got our brush, and then we're going to make a type palette, which is just a collection of brushes. If you can imagine like an old-fashioned color palette that a painter uses, that board, that piece of wood with all those colors on it. And so the palette is going to be composed of two things itself. One is an array of brushes, and it's going to have it's going to carry the information of which color has been selected as well. Or if no color has been selected, it'll carry no information. It'll be a null or empty string. And it might seem like it's duplicating the work to have the selected color information being held both in our brushes array, because that particular brush is going to be selected, and to have it here. And in a sense it is, but it's also just a basic form of indexing, in that it makes it much easier when we're actually going through this complex variable in our template, that we have one place that we can, if we just want to know which color is selected, we just look to the selected color in the palette, and we don't have to loop over the array of brushes to figure it out. So at the back end it's much easier, even if it seems like it's slightly more work and slightly more storage than needed. So that's what we're going to do for the brushes in the palette. And then finally, to tie all of this stuff together, we're going to need to make an all-encompassing super variable, I guess you'd call, or superstructure. And so what we're going to call that is a color box. Why not? Because it's a box of colors, right? Both the palettes and just the fact that it's a big old box of colors. So that seems poetic. But we're going to create it, and all it's going to be composed of right now is going to be our grid, which is a grid, and our palette, which is a palette. So it's saying that this is one of these types of structures, and this is one of these types of structures. And if I wanted to be less confusing, I would call it like the grid or something, you know. But I don't mind being confusing, and hopefully, you know, it'll make sense to you guys. So that's what it's going to be called. And with that, I think we're done with our structures. The next step is the somewhat odious task of implementing them. But it's really not that bad. I say odious, but it's kind of a joke because it's not. So first we're going to define var color box as a color box, just like we did with the grid. And then we're going to say, so we've got our we make our grid in this section of code, which once we start actually saving information, we're going to probably want to move that aside, but for now it's fine. And so we're going to say that colorbox.grid equals grid. So that's just the way, you know, to shove it into the super variable. And then the next step is that we're going to want to make our palette. To do that, why don't we just go ahead and make a function called add_make_palette. And it takes, well, it takes one piece of information. It takes a selected color as a string, and it returns a palette. So if you haven't seen, we haven't really gone over this before, and if you haven't seen this outside of this video, the way these functions work, a function is defined by the fact that's called, it has func on the left of it, right? So it's a function. This is the title of the function. This is these are the input variables. So in this case, we're inputting a string called selected color, and this is what it outputs. And if it has two things like palette, say string. So for example, if we're returning an error, that would say that we're outputting two variables, which is somewhat unique in Go. I'm sure there are other languages that do it. I don't know them personally. It's really awesome to be able to output multiple variables as a normal thing in a programming language. The most common use of this is, in fact, like I mentioned, is to make the first part is what you send out if everything goes okay, and the second variable is just your error, however you define errors. So like if we can say that, like, for example, if selected color, actually we'll probably even use this, so I'm going to leave in the error string. If selected color equals null, for example, we can say return, so let's just say var palette, say return palette, and then no selection. Okay, and then when this function is called into and this variable is filled out, the calling routine would look at this variable and it would say if it's not null, or if it equals no selection, either say that an error has occurred, so we're not going to create the grid, or we're going to say just make a new grid, or do whatever we want. But it's really helpful in that sense. Yeah, so that's how that works. But first things first, let's just create our palette. Okay, so let's just loop over the color array that we made, and for each color in that array, let's make a brush for it. And if that brush is if that color is selected, we're gonna go ahead and select it in our structure, and then we should be pretty much done. So we don't care what the index is. Contained in range of color array. We're going to say that brush equals brush, and we're going to say that color is color, which is kind of a tautology, but that's fine. It's pretty funny. And we're going to say if color equals selected color, that brush dot selected equals yes. And then finally, we're just going to say palette dot brushes equals append palette dot brushes, and then brush. And I don't think we've looked at this before. This is, once you've created your dynamic array, this is the code that lets you append to it, you know, stick another element to the end of it and keep doing that as long as you want. Basically it's saying, you know, dynamic array is equal to the old dynamic array when you append some new element to the end of it. And obviously we want to make the new array the same as the old array, just so we're saying brushes equals brushes. It's very easy and you'll use it a lot. And then with that we should be done. Oh, one more thing just to make life easier. We're using this function both to make the palette, and it's also doing a bit of input validation, because we hope that selected color is one of the colors in our array, right? So off, red, green, blue, white, yellow. But suppose that somehow they got, you know, orange in there, or they got train station in there, or some, you know, suppose they entered some crazy old thing as a string, they being the end user, by some by some elite hacker mechanism that we don't really know, you know. How do you handle that? Well, probably if you're not thinking about it too much, you'll just blindly go ahead and say that the selected color in the palette is equal to that string. But, you know, as pointed out, if one of these elite hackers, you know, screws around with your input methods, they're probably going to be able to break your website that way. So, you know, to keep the hackers out, we're going to use a very straightforward method that we're only actually going to set the palette. Oh. The palette's selected color if the selected color that's passed in is one of the colors in the array, which we are using through this sort of mechanism. So it's serving two purposes, which probably could be separated out, but we're here now, so let's make it here now. Okay, and I just realized that this is selected, not selected. So with that, we should be done. So then if we go here and we say that colorbox dot make palette equals palette dot palette equals make palette, and then for now we're going to pass in nothing. So we're going to say that the user is always selecting nothing, but it could be otherwise. And then we've got our return code. You know what, let's just get rid of the return code. Let's not worry about it. We'll worry about it with some other things that we're going to do, but for now we're not going to worry about it because we're already validating it sort of implicitly. Return. Having done all that, the final step is to pass our color box into the template, where once we were passing in the grid itself. So first of all, we have to sort of update the template a little bit, because instead of just being dot rows, it's dot grid dot rows that we're ranging over, and then everything else should fit okay. And to test out our palette design, let's just go ahead and range over dot palette dot brushes. That's right, yeah, that's right. Okay, and we're gonna say return the color, or and I don't know, dash dash, just to separate them out a little bit. And break. Okay, so let's see if this worked. Whoops, threw an error here. Going through the command console, we see that we got a panic, which is GoSpeak for something terrible happening in the template at in root 10. So if we look at our code, we look at our template, we look at root, the definition side of the template, and we look at the 10th line, we're brought here, which is this bracket bracket color on bracket bracket. What we forgot to do is we forgot that it's not color, it's dot color. And let's see if that fixes things. Okay, so now that our update's complete, let's see if our brushes are showing up in the website as we were hoping. Okay, and there we go. It's not pretty, but it's doing what we want it to do. So the next step is, so we're not just displaying them, but we want to make them clickable. So let's just make them a nice little link, you know, equals slash, and then let's define the variable for choosing a brush color as color, which is not very creative, but you know, That's what it is, so that's what we're gonna do. Okay. So the link is created. We'll say /a here. And then on top of that, let's throw in the if statement so that, suppose that a color is selected, right? So let's say if dot is selected, we want to use some way of indicating that the color is the one that's been chosen. So we'll use star. Okay, and then we'll throw that on the other side as well, just so it's like star color star, so it looks like it's done. Okay, let's give that a go. Alright then, our update is done. Let's see if our color schemes are making it to the website. And they are. And we see we got a link for off, which is black, but is amusingly still titled off. We've got red, green, blue, white, yellow. And you see that when you click a color, it updates the link so that it's defining the variable. So if you don't know, basically after the question mark, it's all variable equals whatever. And so it's defining color as yellow. Now it's not making the stars appear because, remembering back to our code, we sort of just hard-coded the selected color as nothing right here as empty string, but we're going to fix that right now. So let's go ahead and let's pull in the selected color from the request. So let's say selected color is equal to r.formValue color. And if you don't know, all this is saying, this is basically the general means by which you can pull this data here. So for example, we're saying that look at the variable called color and what is it equal to in the response or in the request. And if there's nothing in color, like if color is not even a variable, it'll just say empty string. It'll say it ain't no thing. But in this case, it is a color. But so we're gonna go ahead and throw that into the make palette. Now, if you're wondering, this is also probably the first mechanisms a leak hacker would use to break this system, because if they said that, you know, like you can enter these in by hand, right? So you can say like, oh, it's a yellowtail, and then, you know, if you don't have a means of dealing with it, your grid's going to try and define one of these pegs as yellowtail, and it's going to break because that's not a color. It's not even close to a color. But we kind of assume that whatever's getting thrown in is, unless we have a validation function, which we are doing in make palette. Alright, so we've thrown in our color selection. Let's go ahead and update again, see if our selecting mechanism is working. Okay, so now that our upload is done, let's go take a look and see if our color selector is working. Select green, and there you go. It's selecting, the color is showing up in the URL, and it's putting our asterisk next to the color. So you see green, then you go to blue or off. Going back to what we were talking about earlier about validating the text of it, it's like if we say like offset instead of off, it just ignores it. It pretends like you said nothing. And that's what we want. If you enter something it doesn't expect, we don't want it to crash, we just want it to pretend like you did nothing at all. So that's good. Okay, so that's working. The next step is we're going to make it so that we can click on each of these cells, and if there's a color put in there, it'll change the color value.